Congratulations on the new 6-part series, Up Close, available in podcast form today, on YouTube tomorrow. What can we expect in this limited edition 6-episode series?
Well, Nick, it's kind of it's a series of one-on-one conversations with people in sport. They're broadly defined. So athletes, front office people, maybe some people in the entertainment world who have a big connection with sport. Um, but I guess the common ground is people who are people I wanted to talk to, number one, and who have kind of an interesting story to tell one way or another. So it allows me to stretch out a little bit in terms of the interviews. They're not little bits and bites. They're long form interviews, and we're traveling to people's homes in a lot of cases, or going to where they work, and kind of seeing them in their own environment. It's kind of spins off the work I did a million years ago at the newspaper, and more recently it's at with Sportsnet, and the main thing is I'm having a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. After all your experience, you kind of get to bring it back to the old school where you started, but in a totally new form of media, which I think everyone's pretty excited for. Do you have any advice on how to get into an interview and get the most out of your subject, rather than, tee up the average question with an average answer, to get deep and to get something that people can sink their teeth into?
Jay, it's a heck of a question, because and again, no one ever kind of taught me how to do it, and I'm not sure I still know how to do it. Although I've watched a lot of great interviewers over the years, and listened to a lot of great interviewers over the years, and I worked with some pretty great interviewers. I think that, but I guess what I would say now is, kind of be as prepared as you possibly can. Kind of know where you want to go, and know as much about your subject as you possibly can. And like I always write a bunch of notes and stuff, and then when I sit down with the person, I put them away, and then you have to listen. I think the most important, it's kind of normal human interaction. I always say to people, look, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, a stranger or a friend or a business acquaintance or whatever, if you can sit down over a beer or a coffee and have a conversation, you can do an interview. But the biggest thing, and I think it's the mistake sometimes I hear as a listener or as a viewer, um, are people who don't listen to the answer. So that you kind of got, you got your list of questions from 1 to 10, and you kind of work your way through them.
Yeah.
But the person often says something interesting in between. And, like one of the greatest interviewing techniques that somebody did tell me about once upon a time was say to somebody, well, hey, what do you mean by that? Or that's interesting. Tell me more. And if you kind of just open the door and be open-ended, it's amazing what comes out sometimes.
So episode 1, what a get for episode 1 of this mini series. Keith Pelley, what can you tell us about your interaction here?
Well, it was fun. Like, I've known Keith. I started working with Keith. The first time I worked with him, he was a truck producer, and we were producing, I think it was, I forget which hockey lockout or a strike it was, but it was a long time ago. And he was at TSN, and they were having to produce alternative content, right? They needed programming. So we worked on, a couple of things, and he was, but he was a guy in the truck, calling the shots. And again, one of the things I think I learned about TV over the years, what we used to call TV, whatever we call it now, is that people who actually make it, are different than people who sit in offices and just run budgets and do all the kind of managerial stuff. That the creatives, when you get somebody who's actually done that and they rise to the top of the pyramid, it's a great thing, because they really understand what's going on down below, and they have, a creative instinct. They know the difference between good and bad, or good and mediocre. So yeah, Keith started there. He went off and worked for Fox, and produced NFL games, NFL Europe games, came back and ran TSN, ran the Argos, ran the Olympic Consortium, the broadcast consortium in 2010. I was deeply involved with that. Then jumped from Bell to Rogers, ran Sportsnet, ran Rogers Media, and then went over to run the European Golf Tour, just as the crap was hitting the fan with Live Golf and the Saudis and all kinds of stuff. So he's kind of been at the center of a lot of things over the years, and obviously coming back to run MLSE now is, like, arguably the most important role in Canadian sport. I think business wise it is. Things are shifting there, even with Rogers buying out the Bell ownership. But imagine being in a seat where you run Leafs, Raptors, Argos, Toronto FC. The Jays are going to be part of that portfolio, or somehow are going to merge into that at some point. You've got the stadium, you've got the building, the arena, 2 arenas. Like, it's a heck of a job. So yeah, there's a lot of that in the podcast. And we've known each other for decades now, so I think there's kind of a comfort level between us as well that probably comes through.
And as you mentioned, you know him so well and you understand what he's done and all the hats that he's worn. What kind of sense did you get about him now being at that, pinnacle of certainly MLSE, but Toronto sports, Canadian sports, sports in general? What takeaways did you get from talking to a man who's in that position at this juncture in time?
Well, I think he's loving it, number one. Like, even with all of the, the different hats he's got to wear, I think, and some of the pressures that come to bear on him. I think as a, there's a lot of fan in Keith still, so that's good. And I think he's very excited to, especially, to be honest, especially the Leafs, like to have a hand in the operation of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think for him is like a boyhood dream.
Yeah.
He doesn't, in some ways, he doesn't, he inherit some of the baggage, which is good. It's not, there's not many people there who he's hired. There will increasingly be some. He brought in a guy to kind of remake the whole Toronto FC operation, but he comes in clean and fresh, and he wants to win. And I know everybody wants to win, right? Like, sure, everybody that's ever run those organizations has wanted to win. But I think he's got a real, Keith's got a kind of an infectious enthusiasm. Anybody again who's ever worked with him or for him would say that. And I saw him when the Argos won the Grey Cup, and of course, Keith is a big Argo guy, and he ran the Argos at one point. Like, he was jumping around like a little kid on the field, and that's kind of goofy, but I think it's great. Like, I think sometimes the thing we miss when we talk about the business of sport is that, if you don't get any joy out of it, what are you doing? You should go sell insurance, right?
It's true, and I think naturally when I see Keith Pelley take that job, I wonder why. Was it just like a right place, right time type situation where you just mentioned all the fandom involved, where it's like this just makes too much sense not to take?
Yeah, I think that. Well, I think it was the opportunity. Like, I do think, like, he was very comfortable. He was living in England, on a golf course, running the European tour, golfing. Probably being pretty well compensated, I'm guessing. So life was good for him. And I'm not sure he would have rushed back to Canada for anything other than this. But yeah, I think it was, and I really, again, not just because I'm talking to you guys today, but I think the Leaf part of it was the biggest part. Like, he's run the Argos. He's run, he ran an Olympic broadcast. He's, had a hand in a lot of stuff. But the chance to kind of have a hands-on role with the Toronto Maple Leafs, his kind of childhood dream team. I think if that hadn't been a part of it, he wouldn't have come back. But I think that's number one.
You mentioned him jumping around like a child and how almost like, maybe he should, maybe he shouldn't be doing. I think that is insane. If you're in that position and you get to do those things, that's the first thing you should do, is enjoy the ever living hell out of it. What do you think guys like him and all kinds of other people in this market would do if the Toronto Maple Leafs pulled off a Stanley Cup any point in time here?
Well, Jay, again, I've been asking myself that question for a long time, because, like, I was 8 years old. I'm not a kid. I was 8 years old when they won the last time. But in those days, winning the Stanley Cup, Leafs winning the Stanley Cup wasn't unusual. Like, I don't have much memory of it, to be honest, at 8 years old, because they were winning Stanley Cups when I was a kid. But all those years as a sports writer, going to all those games, covering all those playoff series, every year the last story you wrote about the Leafs was that the Leafs lost. Like that, and sometimes it, or that the season was lost, if they didn't make the playoffs. But normally covering a playoff series, and the last story was always, yep, there we go. It's been since 1967. They're not going to win it again this year. What are they going to do? But always kind of imagining what it would have been like. Like, I still think of what it was like in '93. That the 7 games against the Kings, right? Like that. That's the closest, and it was nuts. Like, the city was crazy during that whole playoff run, and that was an amazing year. That was a Jays World Series year too. The city was rocking, but people were in the streets every time they won a game. I think from the first round, as I recall. But the Habs in the final, like, what that would have been like. And I guess the only thing I can look at now is what happened when the Raptors won. And but it would be bigger than that. That was monstrous. Whether 1 million people on the streets of Toronto that day was, it did kind of catch fire all over the country. But, like, I know, from working, at Sportsnet, I know what the TV ratings look like when the Leafs succeed, and how it's different. Like, the Oilers going to Game 7 of the final last year, that was a big deal. The Flames have been to the final. The Senators have been to the final. The Canucks have been to the final. The Habs have been to the final. But if the Leafs ever got there, just watching how those numbers mount when they're in the playoffs and the difference, like, it wouldn't just be a Toronto thing. I know people outside of Toronto don't want to hear that, but it wouldn't just be a Toronto thing. The people would be coming out of the woodwork all across the country.
Agreed.
Yeah, I was living there, obviously, in Toronto when the Raptors won, and yeah, that was unlike anything I've seen. But I'm right there with you. It would be a billion times bigger if the Toronto Maple Leafs won the cup. Stephen, can't thank you enough for this. Big fan of your work. Looking forward to this series. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.